Hello, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Architizer Live. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you have attended one of our previous live talks, welcome back. It's so great to have you with us again. I'm Paul Keskeys, Editor-in-Chief at Architizer, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Erman, founder of Amber Book, to talk about one of the most important moments in any architect's career, getting licensed. We'll be exploring the winding path to becoming an architect and learn why early licensure is beneficial not only for talented young professionals, but also for the firms they work for. While we wait for the room to fill up, you know the drill by now. You're invited to say hi in the chat box on the right side of your screen and let us know where you're tuning in from today. And most of you are likely familiar with our live events by now, but for those who are new, here are some quick tips about the platform. If you're having any technical difficulties with the stream, a quick refresh of your browser usually resolves any issues. But if not, you can click on the help icon in the bottom left corner, and you'll see a few options for improving your picture, the sound, and so on. We'll also be sending a recording of the talk right after the event, so you can catch up on anything you missed there. You can type anything you like in the chat, but if you have a question for Michael, click on the questions tab on the bottom right of your screen and type your question there so it can be saved for the Q&A session a little later on. Now, throughout the presentation, Michael also has some poll questions for you. A couple of these will be able to be answered in the chat directly, but there are also a couple in the polls tab. So when prompted, you can click on the polls tab and provide your response there. And now, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Michael to the stage. What have you got in store for us today, Michael?
Hello, everybody. This is Michael Erman. And so the poll question I asked is, what is the title of, I asked it in the chat, what's the title of almost licensed or almost architects in their 20s at your firm? The plurality said intern or intern architect. Many others said designer. And those of you guys who are intern architects or designers know the challenge of having that name and the kind of desire many of us have to be called architect, and the kind of frustration maybe we share when we can't probably within our state probably can't be called an architect and have to be called architectural assistant or designer and so forth. And so this is Alec. Alec has had the most charmed career I know of for an architect in his 20s. He designed when he was an undergraduate, he designed a thesis project where his thesis project was to design, he just kind of made this up, design a surf park for his native Virginia beach. And your eye will be drawn to this, but it's actually all this stuff around here. And he went to a firm and he said, I have this idea for, and the firm knew his thesis because he had used it to apply. And they said, why don't we try to see if we can actually make that happen? So they got money from Pharrell, the pop star, who's from Virginia Beach, and it's now being built. And so his thesis project is actually being built. And he is the one who brought the project to the firm at 23. But he was in meetings, and it's a 50-year-old firm. His title is design principal. He's still in his 20s. He's the youngest member of the board in the history of the firm. It's about like a 150-person firm. But he's in a meeting with a client a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago, and the client says, can I have, he's been running the meeting because he's a design principal. And the client says, can I have your card? And he says, sure. And he gives him his card, and the client says, oh, because it says intern architect, and the client says, oh, are you here for the summer? Then are you just here for the summer then? And he said, no, I'm not just here for the summer. And that's when he realized, I need to get licensed. This is nuts. And so that's a big reason that those who aren't licensed are, because you see, those who aren't licensed are frustrated because you see yourself working in the firm like this. But the way that your card reads and the way that your kind of title reads is probably a little bit more like this, especially if it has the word intern. And it is super interesting how important language is in this world. So first, let's talk about the benefits of early licensure to you, assuming you are in your 20s, and then we'll talk about the benefits to the firm, and we'll talk about how to get licensed. So This is a survey. So our NCARB, the folks who administer the licensure exam, every few years send out a survey. It's called I think it's called the State of Practice, something along those lines. And this one is from last year. It was published last year. It was surveyed the year before. And you can see they have, most of the answers have between 4,000 and 6,000 something respondents. So it's a pretty good sample size. And here they asked people how valuable, for people who got licensed, how valuable is an architectural license to you professionally on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. And you can see, even after you get licensed, it's not one of those things where once you get it, you're like, oh, that was nice. Actually, there's some of that. We can maybe talk about that. But generally, I've never met someone who said, I wish I hadn't done it. And it's generally something that people who once they're licensed feel is quite valuable. Let's see. And then they asked them, when did it become most valuable to you? When was it, if you are licensed, when did it become most valuable? And you see the plurality of respondents, nearly half said immediately upon licensure, and another, let's call it 20%, said in the first 3 years after licensure. So generally the benefits don't come at some kind of magical later time, at least the self-reported benefits. They come fairly right away. And so this should be in a poll question, I think. Let's see where you guys are at relative to licensure. Are you young and afraid? Are you young and confident, young and licensed, mid or late career and afraid, mid or late career and confident, or mid or late career and licensed?
You can head over to the poll tab and check one of the boxes that most describes you. Actually, you can check more than one if you're confident and licensed. I allowed multi-choice in case that was necessary.
Right.
But yeah, have a vote. Would you like me to let you know that?
Yeah, sure. Let me know what's the breakdown.
So it's changing all the time. So I'll give people a few more seconds here.
Are you able to share it?
Yeah, it's really even actually. We've got 23% mid or late career and licensed, 18% mid or late career and afraid, 20% young and confident, 15% young and licensed. The lowest is young and afraid. So I'm glad.
Good for you.
Not too afraid.
Good for you. Good for you. All right. So if you are licensed, for the group that is licensed, which one of these three best describes you? You wish you had started earlier, you're glad you started when you did, or you wish you had started later? So let's go ahead and get a new poll up there.
Okay, the new one is up. Okay. Give people a few more seconds to answer this one. This one you can only check one box of the three. All right. So as of right now, 65% are glad they started when they did, 35% wish they'd started earlier, and 0% wish they started later.
That's not super surprising. So generally people are either glad when they started that they did, or wish they'd started. No one ever says, I wish I had waited longer. So this is another question. Again, 6,000 respondents here, architects. Approximately how many years should a candidate work under the supervision of a licensed architect to gain competency for independent practice, regardless of state requirements? And you see generally most of the answers are kind of in the 2 to 5 years range, which would put you in your mid to late 20s, assuming you had a bachelor's degree, traditional 5-year bachelor's degree, and went straight to practice. So, and the plurality, the most common is 3. Now, the average age that someone starts taking the exams is about 30, 31, something like that. And the average age that they get their license is something like 33 or 34. So that's actually a good deal later than when people think that you maybe are ready to become licensed. And so let's take a look at this for a second. I'll let you guys marinate on this. If you can read it, if it's too blurry to read on your screen, let us know and I'll kind of read it to you. So here we're saying, okay, why did you initially decide to earn your license? And obviously, based on the percentages, you're allowed to answer more than one for this one. And it's really heartening because generally architects are kind of golden retrievers. We're just really happy to be here and really, just delighted to be given the opportunity to design your building. And we're probably, among the professions that I know, we're among the most kind of self-improvement oriented. And so the top reasons that people, aspiring architects, decide to get licensed to achieve personal goals and fulfillment, that seems really intrinsic and worthwhile. To be called an architect, that's what we were talking about, like that title, that's maybe a little bit external, but it's also kind of self-actualization oriented. To increase my career advancement, that's a little bit, again, a little bit more shark-like, but again, reasonable and also kind of self-actualization oriented. To have evidence that I meet professional standards, to increase my credibility, and to achieve professional growth. Those are the most common. And you'll be heartened to know the least common responses were ones that were kind of the plumbing of a profession, like just kind of getting it done, or getting it done because you want more money or whatever. So the pressure to to respond to pressure in the workplace, that was among the least. To obtain public work, that was among the least. So to get something, to get a leg up, really didn't come into play. To practice in other jurisdictions, again, that's kind of part of the plumbing of a profession. To increase job security, we all know architects don't have a lot of job security anyway, at least those of you guys who have been around the profession for at least 15 years. To sign and seal documents, or because clients value licensure. It's not that people didn't say those, it's just that these were the least likely reasons that people gave generally. And so I'm super proud of us that we're, that in an anonymous survey, we want to do it kind of quote unquote for the right reasons. And so, yeah, in your firm, this is an open-ended one you can answer on the chat. In your firm, for licensure, is there a bonus or raise? And if so, if you feel comfortable sharing how much, you certainly don't have to share how much. We'll give you about 30 seconds to share in the chat.
I think something that's really interesting about this is understanding about the culture of transparency. How many people are willing and even able to answer that question with a number.
Right.
Good to see.
And there's a separate complication too, which is of course that architects are forbidden from colluding in what they charge, and so it's always a little bit dicey to ask about any kind of situation like this. And so we're getting all kinds of yeses and lots of nos, and 20% salary increase, 2% salary increase, $1,500. Some are one-time bonuses, some are $1,000, some you have to ask. And so there is money involved, and a non-negligible amount. In fact, you can go to the AI, and you have my encouragement. If you're on a computer, you can minimize this window, and you can go to the AIA survey salary calculator, and you can. It's at info.aia.org/salary/salary. I don't know. You'll figure it out if you do AIA salary calculator. And you can put, look at the whole country or just your region, and you can decide if you want to look at different levels of architects. And the way they have it broken down, and you can look at the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile salaries for architects. I summarized it for you. So on the y-axis is the 50th percentile salary. So it's the median salary. Each one of these graphs represents a different group of people. So this first one, are you able to see where my mouse is?
No, you'll have to describe.
No? Okay. So on this first one, it's the first one on the left is what's called an architect one. So it's an unlicensed. So it's an unlicensed person. It's a range, but generally let's call it 3 years. So 3 years experience, unlicensed, you make this much, that's at 67,000 or something. Licensed, you make what, 74,000 or something like that for someone who's an architect one. The next one, the third one over is architect two. I should probably do these in different colors. The third one is architect two, and unlicensed, and then the fourth one is architect two licensed. That's someone nominally who has about 6 years of experience. And you see, Architect 2 unlicensed with 6 years is again about 75,000, and then it's about maybe 85,000 or something like that once you're licensed. And then 9 years or more, Architect 3. In each case, the next level up, unlicensed, starts about where the level behind it, licensed, starts. Architect 3 with about, let's say, call it 9 years experience, makes about 85,000, and without a license, and then with a license, it's more like 97,000. And so nominally, we can say, on average, and obviously it's going to vary wildly from firm to firm, but on average, and that's how most of us make lots of decisions when we're trying to decide whether to, for instance, to get licensed. On average, you're going to make about $6,000 more, and that's very conservative. $6,000 more once you're licensed at any level, which is like $500 a month. So if you are if you got the stuff to be licensed, and all of you do, trust me on this. We've helped. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Michael Erman. I'm an architecture professor at Virginia Tech. I've been here. I'm actually here in the university library right now. I've been here this is my 22nd year. I'm finishing up. I teach design studio. I teach building systems. Sometimes I teach like a materials and methods of construction class. I teach graduate classes in architectural acoustics. And I started a course for folks who want to get licensed called Amber Book. We've helped 40,000 people study for these exams that you need to pass to get licensed. And if Matt's on here, he can put every Thursday we meet for a Zoom call, about 250 of us or so every Thursday, and we answer questions together to practice for the exam. So you can go on our website to find out where to link for that if you don't copy and paste it from when Matt hopefully is going to put a link in a minute. But anyhow, we put, I don't know, 1% of our content of our video. We have animated content, so our course is animated. We put 1% online. We have over 8 million views and 35,000 subscribers just for that 1% of our content. And I've do AIA seminars kind of. In fact, I'm going to Winston-Salem to do one tomorrow morning, all over the country as well. Anyhow, so where was I? Right. So it's about $6,000. So basically, one way to look at that, I think it's frankly from an economics point of view, the proper way to look at it is every month that you put off getting licensed when you might have otherwise, you are giving away $500 on average. Maybe much more, it may be a lot less, it may be zero, but on average, you're giving away $500. And I think that's probably the proper way to look at it. Now, in general, small firms, believe it or not, offer higher starting salaries. Compensation goes up about 4% a year. The last few years, inflation's been 5% and 8% in 2 of the last 3 years. But we all know that. But there's kind of a compounding element to it too, right? So if you get licensed now, not only will you get the career advancement now and be able to call yourself an architect now, but you'll also have the compounding nature of those advancements in the future. So you'll be getting, more likely to have more responsibility. You'll be more likely to move farther up in the firm. You'll be more likely to I don't know, you name it, pick your team, or whatever it is that you want to do. You'll likely be more likely to do it if you get licensed on the now side. And later I'll explain to you what, I'll give you some checklist items for how to think about licensure and kind of what to expect, at least from the exam. But it compounds, and you want to start early because you won't be busy. You won't be less busy later. Like, trust me on this one. We could probably have a poll question. You guys can put it in the chat. Is anyone less busy now than they were, 5 years ago? As you move along in your career, and especially as you have start a family, you will be much more busy later than you are now. And in fact, when I give in-person, I've given 50 or so in-person 3-day seminars at AIA chapters around the country. And when I give them, the average age is probably in the low 30s, but that's really misleading. It's like a camel's hump, like a double hump kind of distribution where I have lots of people in their 20s and lots of people in their 40s, because frankly, many of the people in their 30s are really busy raising small kids. And this process of getting licensed is actually kind of a fun process, and you'll become a better architect from it. But it is a time-consuming process, and it's very difficult for many of us to kind of justify walking away from our families at those kind of really important ages of kids, and moving on to do something else. So if you want to have a family one day but don't have one now, I cannot encourage you enough to kind of move along. All right. So that's the benefits to you. You'll get more money. You'll be able to call yourself an architect. You'll move up in your firm, and you have to do it anyway. So why wait? That's probably the most important reason, because it compounds. The benefit for your firm, for those of you guys who are firm leaders or aspire to be, well, it's funny because, well, let me ask you this. And again, we have to be careful. I'm not quite sure. We don't want to, be accused of collusion. But how much more does your firm charge for an hour of your time if you were licensed? So go ahead and put that in the chat if you feel comfortable putting it in the chat. So how much more does your firm charge the client for an hour of your hour of your time if you were licensed? Yeah, I mean, the numbers you guys are sharing on the chat are consistent. We did a poll last week on our own 40 Minutes of Confidence, our own Zoom call, our Thursday evening Zoom call, Thursday at 6 Eastern time Zoom call. And your numbers are looking pretty similar to our numbers that we got from the poll. And so you can do these numbers with if you're a firm leader, you can do these, you can replace the numbers I'm going to give you with your own firm. But let's say that you have a $95, you're charging the firm $95 an hour for an unlicensed architect who's been there maybe 3-4 years. So, she's in her late 20s. And so you maybe are charging something like $135 an hour if they're licensed. So that's a difference of $40. So you can figure out what the difference is for your own firm, but I'm going to start with the assumption that there's a $40 difference. So whip out your calculators, everyone get out your phones. And here's what I want you to do. That difference that your firm is charging is $40. So do 40, that's $40. Times, let's call it 2,000 hours a year. So $40 times 2,000. And again, you can do it for whatever the difference is in your firm if you prefer. And you get $80,000. That's if you were charging every hour of time to the client, which of course you're not. So a good solid healthy utilization rate might be 65%, meaning 65% of the time, which is a big, very much in play for the architectural licensure exam. This kind of concept that not every hour, not every minute of your time is being charged to the client. Sometimes you're unjamming the copier. Sometimes you're planning the office holiday party. Sometimes you're onboarding a new staff member. These are things that are not charged to a client. And so we'll take that $80,000 and we'll multiply it by 0.65, meaning 65% of the hours that you're working, or that your newly licensed architect is working, is going to be charged to the client. And you get $52,000. Now, this isn't particularly optimistic. It's not particularly conservative. It's kind of right down the middle. So, so a firm will make $52,000, again, kind of nominally, assuming, and this is a big assumption, this is assuming there's enough work for licensed architects. In other words, assuming there are enough tasks in your firm. And lately, based on the firms I've been talking to, maybe not the last few months, but certainly the last 5-10 years, there has been an insatiable need for architects at just about every level in firms. So assuming that you have enough work to assign to a licensed architect, and that by charging that extra money, you're not somehow losing jobs because now your fees are too high, which is something that would have to be considered. But making some baseline assumptions that are not unreasonable, but somewhat optimistic, it's $52,000 extra per licensed architect that the firm is going to charge. So even if they're paying you an extra $6,000, they're still coming out with $46,000 for the same employee with the same desk and the same kind of healthcare costs. So when we first started offering what are called firm licenses, because we offer kind of all-you-can-eat firm licenses for helping folks get licensed through our animated course, I didn't really understand why the firms were. I didn't understand those numbers yet, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't understand those numbers for years. And I thought maybe they're doing it to help the profession, which I think many people are getting a firm license to help the profession. So with a firm license, once you have a firm license, everyone in your firm is eligible for access to our Amber Book course, and so everyone we almost, I'm going to go ahead and say we always spur a bunch of people to get licensed who wouldn't have otherwise. Especially it becomes kind of a group thing when you're walking by the conference room and you see everyone with their Amber Book books, in the conference room, and you say, "What are you doing?" And they say, "Come join us. We're all going to get licensed this month." Um, and so I thought that maybe some firms were doing it to help the profession, and I think that is a big factor. I think generally people, as we saw, are magnanimous, and or someone asked for it. Maybe they want to be a hero. Maybe we do find that it's often when a firm gets a firm license, it's often a single mid-level person that's super pestery. So it's not usually some groundswell or some vote by the members of the firm. It's usually one person who wants to get licensed and wants their boss to pay for it, and is like, "Hey, can you get this? Can you get Amber Book or some other course like it?" And they say, "Well, I'll think about it." And then they have to follow up. "Have you thought about it?" And they say, "No, I haven't brought it up with the higher ups. I will." And then, "Well, when are you going to do it?" Because I'm waiting to get licensed. So either it's just because our natural nature, human nature is to be responsive to people who have a request, like, "Can you get a firm license?" Or maybe for retention or recruitment purposes, you want to have this as a benefit to folks. And for a little while, I thought that I had found the kind of smoking gun, that it was actually to move up the firm ranking. So if you go online and search for like architecture firm rankings, these rankings websites, they need data to rank because they don't have the wherewithal to be subjective. So they will often look. One of the factors will be, so I'm told, one of the factors will be what percentage of your employees are licensed, as a way to kind of, if you have a higher percentage, you move up the rankings. And I thought maybe that was why. I no longer think it's any of those. I think it's the $46,000 extra per, and for the firm, it's also compounding, right? It's not just for the first year; it's for the first year and the second year, and it's not per person; it's per person. So if you get 5 people licensed, it's $200,000, and you haven't really done anything different, but you're making better buildings because. So one of the things that's super interesting is that okay, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Those of you guys who are not licensed. When you get licensed, you will be every bit as happy and ecstatic and euphoric as you think you will be upon licensure. However, that euphoria will not last as long as you expect it to. Like, in other words, just like any other good thing that's happened in your life, you eventually go back to your baseline of contentedness, usually after a couple of weeks, and certainly after 48 hours. You're walking on air for 48 hours, and then you're kind of like, a couple times a day, you're like, "I'm licensed, dude, I'm licensed." For me, and that maybe lasts 6 weeks, and then after that, you're like, whatever, you get caught in the rain, and you're like, "This always happens to me. I can't believe," like, you're back to whatever kind of an Eeyore you were beforehand. And so that's the dirty little secret. But the plus side of getting licensed, besides being as euphoric as you think you will be, is that in general, when I talk to people once they're licensed, when they're looking up at getting licensed, their general thought is, just get me licensed. And to that end, we very much teach to the test. But once people are licensed, the general consensus is, "I'm so glad I'm better at my profession. I can't believe how much stuff I didn't know before." That now is, I'm able to have conversations where I'm not getting bullied by my engineers. I'm able to understand the contracts with the clients and so forth. And so, anyhow, all right. 93% of firms in another different NCARB survey reported offering at least one form of employee licensure support in 2023. So it's not super uncommon. Now, that's the firms reporting on themselves. They may just have a single book in a library somewhere on a shelf and say, "Well, I'm supporting it." So I'm not quite, they didn't go more into what that actually means. Do they have something like a firm license to a course, or does that mean that they just are, they just tell people good job, and that's their idea of support. So, if people are going to wait, like, do they wait because they want more experience? And the answer is yes. They often are waiting because they want more experience, because they think they need more experience. But actually, younger candidates take less time to complete the exam. And I'll let you kind of marinate on this for a second. But on the left is 18 to, oh, I can't read that. What's it say? Can you read it? Is it 29? The left bar. And then 30 to 39, and then 40 plus. So those are the three graphs. And the dark green is under 2 years. So this is between their first past exam and their final past exam. There are 6 exams that you need to pass to become licensed. They have an average pass rate each of 52%, which is remarkably onerous for folks. And so if you look at it, younger people actually have a significantly higher pass rate, and they take it in significantly less time, in part because they're more aggressive, in part because they have more time. But my experience says most of it is just because they know how to study. So if you are 25, the idea of studying for a test is just, it's hard, but it's not overwhelming. I don't really understand this because I never really left school, at least not for very long. But it turns out that if you are older than, say, 35 or so, you kind of forget how to study, and it becomes overwhelming. So something that is very big but doable doesn't seem so doable. And so you actually are more likely to pass in less time if you are on the young side. All right. Now, younger candidates, as an aside, are also more likely to complete their AXP hours. AXP, of course, is the hour tracking system that you need to satisfy in most states to get licensed. And so, why then? Why then? Why then do we like? It's remarkable how much people in this profession talk. So, for instance, when NCARB, the folks who administer the exams, a couple of weeks ago announced that they were moving from referencing the 2018 IBC, the 2018 building code, to the 2021 IBC, the 2021 building code, it spread like wildfire. I mean, within a day or two, we were getting peppered with questions right and left. Have you guys updated to 2021? So in the world of licensure, when there is a change, generally it spreads like wildfire and everybody is able to adapt pretty quickly. However, it used to be, I mean, when I say used to be, I mean like 10 years ago and more. It used to be you had to complete all of your AXB. It was called something different then, but you had to complete all of your hours in most states, before you could begin to sit for your exam. So it used to be that the reason that the average architect, I mean, it's, lawyers, they finish their schooling and they take their licensure exam. They take the bar exam. Medical professionals, dentists, dental hygienists, whatever. Any profession, they finish their schooling, they take their exam, and then they're licensed to practice. Architects are on average 33 when they get licensed, and that's just for the ones who eventually get licensed. That does not count the infinity number that you would have to average in for the ones who spend a whole career and never get licensed. So architects historically have always gotten licensed late relative to other professions, because they had to do their hours first. Well, they removed that like a decade ago, that requirement, but it's like vestigial. It's like your tailbone. It just kind of sticks around. This idea that you just have to wait to get licensed just kind of sticks around. And I'm not sure why, but I have a theory. Every office has some guy, and it's always a guy, some old guy who was licensed years ago. And when you start getting licensed, they kind of ask you that dude just asks you questions, and the things he's saying sound like he's supporting you. Like, oh, have you taken PPD yet? Oh, PPD is a beast. I heard that one's a beast. And you're like, why are you so interested? What's with your like prurient interest in my licensure path? And they're super curious, but in a way that you're not 100% sure they're on your side. And it's that kind of pull the ladder up from behind us mentality. Like, I waited, you should wait, everyone waits. For some reason, that has infected the world, and I am now on a crusade. And when I say now, I mean like in the last 2 months, and it will be for the next couple of years. I'm on a crusade to change the entire conversation, where the default is you're going to get licensed. You should all be getting licensed in a much more bold way. You should be getting licensed young. Your firms come out ahead. You come out ahead. You'll be a better architect earlier. You're finishing less time. You're more likely to pass. There is literally no downside that I can think of to doing it sooner rather than later. And I don't know why everyone does it so long. And I think a lot of it is because that dude, there's like this kind of expectations that, I waited, so you have to wait also. And so we're done with that. Okay, all of us here are done with that. We're done with that. And so let's talk about, if you wanted to get licensed, let's talk about some strategies for you and for your firm to get you licensed. The most important thing, the most important thing by far, and in fact, you guys could probably turn off the computer right now and start studying, because there is no hack to getting licensed. There never was, but there certainly is not in ARE 5.0. It's very content oriented. You have to learn about 1,000 things, maybe 1,100, 1,200 things. Each one on average will take you about 10 minutes, but some will be 30 seconds and some will be an hour to learn. And by a thing, I mean, I don't know, different, what a backflow preventer valve does in a plumbing system, or what type of insurance you need as an architect. Each one of those is a thing, and there's maybe 1,000 of them, and they're all very learnable. There's just a lot of them, so it feels like a vast number until you get to the end. So it's like, if you've ever seen the movie Truman Show, he's on that sailboat and he's trying to get out of his crazy life, his crazy kind of Potemkin village life, and the sailboat hits the end of the dome he's living in, and what he thought was infinite was actually just big, and not infinite. And so you just want to be a content-oriented person. There is no hack. There's no, don't be clever. Don't try to jump around. You basically start from the beginning. In our case of a course, certainly you could do it through books, and you just kind of work your way to the end. And that's the best way to get licensed. People generally don't fail the exam because they don't know some secret. They fail the exam because they don't know the answer to the questions. So let's go ahead and let's see what the questions are, because if you've never seen it's one thing just to say an exam, but if you don't know what the exam looks like, the exam is just then daunting. So I'm going to try to undaunt, for those of you who have never taken an exam, let's undaunt it for you. An architect has been hired to design a concrete building. The owner, exceptionally cost conscious, would like to keep to a tight budget. Which of the following is the best way to achieve low cost in concrete buildings? Build within code construction type 1A, require the contractor to include distant cement plants as in his bidding, reuse formwork, or specify type 5 cement. So go ahead and answer that in the poll, right, Paul? We're in the poll here.
Actually, I didn't add a poll for this one.
Okay, so, no worries. Go ahead and just put it. You can put it in the chat. Although you're going to start seeing, everyone's going to start saying stuff, and then you're going to think, oh, I don't want to question Evan. Evan seems to know what he's talking about. He was confident and he did it quickly. Yeah, it's reuse formwork. The formwork is the most expensive part by far in concrete, because you're essentially building the building twice, once in wood for the formwork and a second time. Is this a hard question? No. Are there some that are harder on the exam? Yeah. Are there some that are easier? Yeah. This is probably, I would say, a 40th percentile question. In other words, 60% of the questions are harder than this, 40% are easier, but most of them you can kind of get either by, you know that it's not construction type 1A. That's what that's the most stringent. You wouldn't want distant cement plants. We have to then truck the concrete from farther away. That it could cure up, and if they hit traffic, the concrete could cure in the drum of the truck. We don't want that. Specifying type 5 cement, that sounds okay, but type 5 is what they use for dams. So it's actually, and you'll learn the different types as you go to study for this. Type 5 is it's a low heat cement, so when it cures, it produces less heat. And so we use it for really big dams because when the curing happens in a lot of concrete, we don't want that much heat. It actually starts to, I don't know, maybe melt the rebar or something. So reusing formwork is a big one, what's called slip form construction. All right. So the first suggestion was it's content first. The second suggestion, I kind of alluded to this, especially if you're doing Amber Book, but don't be clever. Like I'll see people, they'll see something, their last exam. I mentioned that there's like 1,000 things, 1,200 things that you need to learn. So their last exam maybe had a bunch of plumbing and roofing on it. So they'll start, and they failed it. So they'll start studying for just plumbing and roofing, plumbing and roofing, plumbing and roofing. And their next one has a bunch of acoustics and elevators. And then they study acoustics and elevators and they fail it. And their next one is a bunch of wood construction and seismic, and they fail it, and so forth. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to find just the right thing. I would just kind of keep plowing through and not worry about what the right thing is, because you don't really know what's going to be in the exam. I mean, again, we have a sense of what's in play for the exam. So if you're doing Amber Book, don't be clever means just start at the beginning and work your way to the end. Don't jump around in that context. All right, let's do another question together. Is this one on a poll, or is this one also open to the world?
This is open to the chat.
Okay, for chat. Okay. A developer hired an architect to design a 21-story condominium on a site that includes highway frontage. I'm going to go ahead and say, don't put your answer in until I give everyone a chance to kind of think about it, and then I'll open it. I'll tell you to go ahead and put your answer in, and try to put whatever. I know it has your real name on here, but try to put the answer you thought was right. A developer hired an architect to design a 21-story condominium in a site that includes highway frontage. The owner is considering erecting a noise barrier to mitigate the environmental noise from the highway. Where should the highway barrier be located to be most effective? Near the apartment, near the highway, or halfway between the highway and the apartment? Go ahead and put your answer in. Yeah, you guys got this. And again, this is something I would say this is like a 35th percentile question. In other words, 65% will be harder than this, but logic says it's not going to be near the apartment. A 21-story wall at the apartment seems a bit excessive. Halfway between seems reasonable until you remember that it's not usually there. It's usually against the highway when you've driven down the road. So the correct answer is near the highway. That's the correct answer, near the highway. All right. All right, so the first thing is content first. The second thing is don't be clever, just learn a lot. The third thing is there are 6 exams, as I mentioned, and there has always been overlap between the content in those 6 exams. And at different times there were 7 or 9. But there has always been overlap, but that overlap was in the Venn diagram was something like 15%. By that I mean, if you saw a question on a given exam, there was maybe a 15% chance that particular question could have been found on a different exam. Maybe it was a question in a exam about building systems, and it was about moisture in walls, and maybe that question could have shown up in a different exam about materials and methods of construction. However, in the current regime we have, which is ARE 5.0, overlap is the defining feature of the exam. It's the thing that changed the most between the last, ARE 4 and ARE 5. And by that I mean, if you see a question on an exam, there's probably on average something like an 80 or an 85% likelihood that question could have been found on a different exam. So my advice is to study for multiple exams. Actually, my real advice is to study for all the exams at once, and then take them all at once. And again, that's very daunting to people because in the past that wasn't done. And because of that dude who's like, oh, I wouldn't do that. And the reason it wasn't done in the past is the exams used to follow a trajectory, or they were separated by course in school. So there was a structures exam. There was a materials and methods of construction exam. There was a building systems exam. There was a pro practice exam. There was a site exam, and so forth. But now they took the same questions and basically reshuffled them in a way where they have an very early design exam, a mid-early design exam, a mid-design exam, a late design exam, a construction administration exam. And so any of these topics is really in play for any of these stages. And so even practice management, which is supposed to be kind of just about how firms are put together. Someone posted recently on the ARE forum that NCAR maintains, they couldn't believe that they had no different welding types for practice management. So even the ones that seem like they're pro-practice oriented will typically have something like 15% of the questions will be from from some other area that you have to study anyway later. So If you study for them all at once, which I have a hard time convincing people to do, but again, nobody ever regrets having done it once they've done it. Um, uh, if they study for them all at once and then take them all at once, it has the following 4 advantages. Number one, you're about 20% more likely to pass each exam. So you're more likely to pass each exam if you studied for them all. Now, would it be worth studying for them all to pass one exam? No, not for 20% increased likelihood. But if you have to study it anyway, it's totally worth it because you have to do it anyway. It's a compounding thing, right? Um, you will pass the exams in about a quarter as many months. So you'll be licensed in a quarter as many months. It's much, much quicker if you take them all at once. And then any you fail, you just retake 2 months later. It's not that big a penalty anymore. It used to be you got to wait a year or 6 months. You will get licensed in about half as many hours studying because you'll study, you'll learn the different types of elevators, and then you'll forget it and you'll have to study it again and learn it again. And it's just better to do it all at once and treat it like one big exam. And finally, if you take 6 exams, you're just so much more likely to get a win. If you take one exam, you have a decent chance of failing it. But if you take 6 exams, you have a pretty good chance of passing at least one. And I think a good goal would be 2, 3, or 4. So if you take 6 exams, your goal should be 2, 3, or 4 passed, and then celebrate when you do it. Now, failing, I mentioned that the pass rates are like half and half, 52, 53, 54% for most of these exams. Some are as low as 48%. And so failing is a feature of this process, not a bug. And so it's just not that big a deal. I think people think, I've never failed an exam before in my life. I really don't want to fail. I really don't want to fail. So I'm just going to study more. But the truth is, right now, I can get you to a point where you're, with Amber Book, where you're maybe 80% likely to pass the exam. You could study more and get to 90%, but you'd have to study like 3 times as many hours to get from 80% to 90%. And in that time, you could have studied for and taken 2 more exams and at 80% instead of having one exam at 90% likelihood of passing. So it's just not that big a deal. If you're a sports fan, it's like a holding call in football or an offsides in soccer or a fault in tennis. So as a little aside, I have I will often tell people who are worried about failing an exam, I'll say, "Are you a sports fan?" And if they say yes, I'll say, "What's your sport?" And they'll say, "My sport is basketball." And I'll say, "Okay, Steph Curry is the best shooter of all time, but and 3-point, but he only shoots like 42% or whatever career. And so most shots he puts up are not going to go in, and it's just not that big a deal. He shoots again." So one time I said, this woman, I said, "Are you a sports fan?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "What sport?" She said, "Really only one sport. I just follow gymnastics." And I got deflated because gymnastics is like the one sport where you do have to be perfect. Like you can't. There is no rimming out the basketball shot or something in gymnastics. You have to be perfect. But in everything but gymnastics, you can find an example where the people who are most aggressive and most likely to foul or most likely to have offside, be offsides or something like that, are also the most likely to score a goal or protect their quarterback from because they're holding or whatever. So you want to be really aggressive and don't worry too much about a fail. Now, let's do another question because we're wrapping up here. A client hires an architect to design an office interior renovation for a financial services firm. Each stockbroker in the firm will be able to select their own office's light fixtures. Pricing for these fixtures should be included in the contract as blank. Is it an allowance, an alternate, or a unit price? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. Take a guess. If you don't know the answer, just take a guess. It's not a big deal. Yeah, about half of you got it right. It's an allowance. This, I would say, is more of once you've studied these 3 ideas, it's actually probably an easy question, but not having studied this would be maybe an 80th percentile question in terms of difficulty, and meaning 20% of the questions you see are more difficult than this, 80% are less difficult than this. All right, so if you are taking the exam and why would you study for 3 times as long to get from 80% likelihood of passing to 90% likelihood of passing? Why would you even bother? Why wouldn't you just take it at 80%? And the reason is because your brain is not thinking of it as 80% likelihood versus 90% of passing, your brain is thinking of it as 20% chance of failing versus 10% chance of failing. I can half my chances of failing, and I don't want to look like a fool. It's very difficult for people to respect and to pity you at the same time. And you would like people to respect you. And if you tell them that you're taking the exam and they say, how'd it go? And then you say, I failed it, they're going to pity you. So they're not going to respect you. It's a shitty part of human nature. So just don't tell anyone. Stop posting about it. Don't tell anyone you're taking it. Just tell everyone after you passed. You don't have to tell anybody. I was the first person in the country to pass all 6 exams in ARE 5.0. That is true. I passed them all in the first try. That is true. But if that was not true, I would not tell you. I would just say, yeah, I passed. I would never tell anyone that I failed. And you don't have to tell anyone you failed. So, I mean, sometimes you need a day off of work to take the exam, but tell as few people as possible. And then you can tell people when you passed, that dude will be like, oh, you passed, and he won't be trying to make you scared. And your friends and colleagues will take you out for a drink. And finally, anytime we're going to be talking about this kind of stuff, the plumbing of our profession, we ought to kind of bring it back to why most of us are here, which is for design and to make beautiful things. And so I asked Paul for a couple of examples of recent Architizer winners. This, I think, wasn't a winner, it was a finalist. This is AUN Studio in Thailand. It's called the Reflection House. And so I think it's always good to kind of marinate on something beautiful at the end of a talk about something pretty banal. An exciting topic about an exciting talk about a banal topic. All right, we have maybe 10 minutes or so for questions. I see some who are written down. I would prefer to answer questions that, yeah, okay, I'll answer. Go ahead.
I can read out some for you if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be great. That would be wonderful, Paul. Thank you.
The ease. Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you so much. It was a very insightful and actually very entertaining talk. Maybe the subject is banal to some, but I actually found it fascinating. I think when you tie it all together with, the salary issue and the kind of the firm culture issues around, certain people holding others back and, everybody trying to break through that,
right?
Break that down. I think, it gets interesting for sure.
What's funny, Paul, when I talk about that dude, sometimes I'll give a talk to an entire firm. And when I talk about that dude, invariably, everyone starts laughing because they all know who I'm talking about. And whatever firm it is, they all just look at each other and just bust out laughing because it is always, it's usually not 2 people, and it's never a woman, and it's never a young person. And everyone just kind of, it's like a meme or something like that. All right, so let's talk about questions.
Sure. Well, the most upvoted question is one that we might need a whole nother hour for, but you can give your initial thoughts. Angela asks, with the addition of artificial intelligence, AI, into the profession, what will the licensing role be, or how do you see the role of a licensed architect evolving or changing, or do you?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I went in October, I went to a conference on AI in architecture. And actually, I've done a whole session on kind of what I learned at that conference, that folks who are part of Amber Book can probably access. Maybe again, Matt, if you can find it, we can post where it is for those who have access. But and basically, I just went around the conference asking the AI experts. Well, I'd be like, well, what can AI do? Can it do a detail yet? Can it do like a gutter detail yet? No, it can't do a gutter detail yet. Well, what can it do? Well, it can help your firm decide whether or not to take this project. Oh, that's pretty interesting. What else can it do? Can it build a building? No, it can't build a building yet, but it's coming. But it can it can help rewrite your specs. So it can know there's no awning on your building, so it can eliminate the part of the specs that covers awning because there's no awning in your building. This is not going to be a surprise to anyone. And so, I'm just, asking question after question, like, can it do this? Can it do this? And, we all are familiar with DALL-E or Midjourney. And so it can obviously make some really beautiful, in fact, when I when Paul sent me this photo, I asked him if it was real because that tree looks weird. And I said, "Is this a rendering or is this a house?" And he said, "It's a house, but that tree looks awfully weird." So it's gotten to the point where we can't even tell. But I asked, can AI, can you make an image with AI, say, a beautiful skylit waiting room for a doctor's office? And obviously, you can make that image. And I was asking, can it then export that as a, as a as a AutoCAD or Revit file? I guess it would be Revit. Can it export as a Revit file? And the answer was not yet, but any day. Like Apple's actually working on that, like as we speak. So I do think it's going to be transformative. Like every other thing that was transformative, I don't think we're going to keep calling it AI. Like, in other words, it's just going to be architecture. Like, in the same way that, 15 years ago, anyone who was in economics was talking about globalism. But, now globalism's here, and it's actually even waning a bit. But now no one's talking about globalism anymore. It's just commerce is global. That's just a thing. Maybe that was 25 years ago. Or resilience, or these kind of buzzwords come in and they get incorporated into so I don't think we're going to call it AI. AI has always, until recently, been whatever computers can't do yet. So when Google could finish your sentence, we didn't call it AI because it could already happen. But suddenly, with large language model, generative AI, and these kind of especially the image generators, I think it's huge. I'm scared like the rest of you. I'm really excited, like many of you are not. But I'm super excited about what this is going to mean in terms of the number of options we can give clients. I'm super excited to teach a studio. I've actually started teaching studios and allowing my students to do AI, just to do it in a transparent way. And to generate images, and we can talk about what's being pinned up, and I just want to know which ones they did, because there's still a skill to understanding space and form and light and texture and materiality and so forth. In terms of how it will adjust the process of licensure, I don't know what AI is going to change, but I can guarantee that licensure will be the last thing in your life to change based on AI. In other words, licensure is such a lagging indicator, a process, that whatever happens in the profession that AI upends, licensure will be the same for much longer than it should be before they actually start introducing AI.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I think it's worth noting that licensure process and the testing process didn't change that much just because we had Google to look stuff up. Like, in other words, if you can look up all those questions I gave you, you probably could have looked most of them up on Google even before generative AI, and it still were questions, still the type of questions you would see on an exam. So the exam is, in a way, asking you if you have kind of a baseline background knowledge to make decisions, and if you have a way of organizing your mind that's architectural and centered around professionalism and putting a building together. And even if AI kind of makes that less valuable, I don't see licensure moving away from that goal in the next 15 years. But beyond that, hard to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the next question is about the kind of economics of getting licensed. Pang asks, assuming $200,000 for tuition alone for 3 years of a Master of Architecture, is it really worth it to go to graduate school in order to get licensed, or just do 2 times AXP? Do you think earning less money whilst doing that is better than spending that 60 to 70,000 a year?
I wouldn't be in a position to give anyone economic advice. In general, the advice I would give to people who are thinking to go to master's degree, independent of the cost, in general, my advice would be go to get a master's degree if you like school, and if you don't like school, don't. It's great if you like it, and it sucks if you don't. Yeah, I mean, I think at some point, Peng makes a pretty good point. But Peng was also saying, when we were kind of talking about stuff, we're talking about how much more money you'll make, and and I think it was Peng who was saying, well, the taxman takes it all anyway. So I'll have to take what Peng says with a grain of salt, because of course the taxman takes it. They take some portion. If you make more money, they take some more money, but you still made more money on balance. But 3 years of MARC. Oh man, because this is someone who obviously doesn't have. It depends on the state also. Some states, that 2 times AXB I don't think is universal across all states. There are only, I think, 14 states that will get you licensed if you don't have an NAAB accredited degree. I think that's probably an individual decision. I happen to love school, so and I love this stuff, so I would always say it's great for me. But that is, I think he or she makes a very good point, that at some price, it's not fair for me on the one hand to say, look, you should get licensed because you'll make more money and it compounds, and on the other hand to say, oh, but it doesn't matter what tuition is because I'm a professor and I think you ought to go to school because I love school. There's a little bit of a double-edged thing going there.
Yeah, it's a all complicated questions, right? Life questions as well as money questions. We're unfortunately out of time to answer any more, but Michael's colleague has kindly answered a lot of questions directly in the questions too. So thank you so much for doing that, Matt. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, I encourage you to get in touch with AmberBook directly and register and join Michael's talks with AmberBook on their platform as well. And yeah, you can get into the nitty-gritty of the exams in much greater detail. But this was a really awesome starting point for a lot of people, I believe. So thank you so much, Michael. And until next time, I encourage everybody to head over to amberbook.com right after this and sign up.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks so much. See you again at our next talk, everyone. Bye for now.